Hi there, folks. I can see people slowly joining. Great to see your faces. Hello. Wonderful. We'll just give it another minute or so as a few others connect. Great. So my name is Lauren Spring, and I am an art educator with the Art Gallery of Ontario. And we're really glad to see you here today. Hello. And a few more faces. Looks like some of you are in real art studios. That's lovely. See a painting on an easel behind somebody there. Lovely. So welcome to today's Senior Social. The way that this works, for those who haven't been here before, is that we're going to focus on today 2 works of art, in this case both prints. Very different approaches to printmaking, very different sort of geographical inspiration and aesthetic choices, but indeed both prints. And then we're also going to do some of our own printmaking, albeit with kind of more everyday materials like a potato. So I hope you've got your potatoes handy. I'll go over the materials we need for the art making session just prior to beginning, but it will be a fun one. So we'll talk about these 2 works, and then we'll get some inspiration from these artists. Today it's David Blackwood and Kenojuak Ashevak. So 2 printmakers that are sort of really iconic kind of Canadian heroes, artistic heroes. And then we'll do our own potato prints. A couple of other just housekeeping things. So this particular session is being recorded. I believe they all are now, just for sort of Amica to have access to others who aren't able to join live. And yeah, of course, initially, once upon a time, these sessions would have been held in person, and so they're on this virtual format for now and for the foreseeable future, the next couple of months, and then we'll reassess as winter comes closer. I do want to take a moment to say thank you to Amica Senior Lifestyles, our lead sponsor of the Senior Social, for generously supporting this program. Thank you, Amica. Here is a picture of the Art Gallery of Ontario. Many of you might have been there, years ago. We are reopened now, so maybe a week or 2 ago. We have some really great new shows on right now, some new exhibitions that are just, kind of breathtaking, and I've just found it such a rewarding thing to be back in the space. And I am curious to know just where folks are joining us from today. Maybe some folks are in downtown Toronto, maybe outside of the city, maybe outside of Canada. You could either type into the chat or turn on your microphone for a moment and let me know where are you joining from today. Oh, we've got someone in Guelph, great. Kingston, North York, Toronto, High Park, very nice. Edmonton, hello, a little bit harder for you to visit in person. A lot more in Toronto, that's wonderful. Yeah, and we've got another Toronto, that's great. Bloor East this time. Super, so that is one of the advantages. As much as I miss being with you all in the actual space and looking at the texture of the paint and the brush strokes, one of the beautiful things is the kind of reach that this program has, that we have had folks, from the States and from Europe and all over the world joining. So that's great. And if you've not been to the AGO in person, this is what it looks like. The facade designed by world famous architect Frank Gehry. I also will take a moment to acknowledge that the land the AGO is on is Mississauga Anishinaabe territory, Mississauga. It is also governed by a treaty between the Mississauga of the Credit and the Canadian government. Toronto is Mississauga Anishinaabe territory. It has also been occupied by other Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat confederacies. There we go. So the first work that I would like to share with you today is this one. And before I share with you some of the things that I just adore about this piece and that I think might be interesting to know about David Blackwood's biography, I'd like to hear from you what you notice. There's an interesting kind of narrative playing out here. And again, you can type into the chat, you can use your voice if you feel so inclined. Yeah, interesting. So yeah, someone's noticed the kind of ship at the back here, and it seems to be glowing. Yeah, something kind of intergalactic or sort of outer space about the color scheme, maybe. What else do folks see? We have a kind of double narrative. We have sort of something happening here in the background, and then another kind of main character here. So someone here has said the enormity of the whale versus the size of the boats. Yeah, and someone else had said the large shape of the whale seems ominous. Great. Yeah, there's something about this whale kind of front and center that is awfully intriguing. And yeah, you can see these teeny boats in the background. Can anyone else tell what's happened here with the boats? If you were to tell this story to somebody else, what do you think is happening there in the background? Yeah, someone has commented here, yeah, the contrast with the iceberg really makes it pop too. You can see, yeah, it's a very shadowy type of image, right? You have a lot of sort of dark blues and blacks, and then the icebergs that kind of pop. And you can see sort of like the veins in there. Oh yeah, and someone here is wondering, is the ship going down? I wonder what makes you say that, Annie? Yeah, and Anna here is saying, yeah, it looks like it's on fire. Yeah, so that glow that someone identified at the beginning is actually indeed a fire. You can see, so this fishing boat, most likely a sealing boat, sealing ship, has caught fire somehow. And so if you look carefully, you'll see that these folks here are the ones who've sort of abandoned ship on the lifeboat. And they're probably thinking, oh my goodness, like our worst fear has come to pass, that, it's a horrible thing. We're out in the middle of the night too, right? This is a dark moment when they've gone fishing here. And so they think, they've been rescued and now they just have to get back to shore. And then we, as the viewer, this is one thing I love about this work, is that we kind of see something that these other characters don't, right? They probably have no idea there's a huge whale just underneath in this little crevice in the water. And so that's one of the things that I love about David Blackwood's work in general. He's able to generate this sort of sense of tension when you look at his pieces. And yeah, in this particular one, you think, oh my, what's going to happen? Yeah, we have Nathan here who said the whale looks sort of like it's grinning, like it's happy or mischievous. Yeah, and depending on what kind of screen you're looking at this slide on, you may or may not be able to see this. Yeah, and the whale, it has this kind of lips open like that. And what I believe are called baleen. I'm not a marine biologist, but I know a little bit from reading animal books with my daughter. Yeah, they're kind of whale, like a filtration system almost. They have this complex way of eating fish, right? So it's kind of these fibrous things that are going down. Yeah, so it looks like this kind of big sort of toothy smile that the whale knows we're in on whatever is happening here. And I'm curious, emotionally, when folks take a close look at this work of art, what feelings come up for you, or what sort of words might you use to define the mood of this print? Okay, so sad, lonely, maybe isolated, cold. Yeah, that's a big one, right? Those icebergs, you can, this is not a friendly, kind of friendly ocean fishing trip. This is, there's something really gritty and difficult about this for sure. Oh, we have someone just joining from the Bruce Peninsula. That's great. Hello, welcome, Donna. Yeah, and I like that. Very nice. Yeah, so kind of something dream. Oh, I like that, Lynn. Dreaming in the deep. That's a really nice, and it links with the other comment above too. So there's a sense of whimsy and magic. So yeah, something kind of dreamy that you wonder, maybe verging on, what is real, what is not real, what is narrative, what's mythology, what's reality, mystery. Not to say mystery. Yeah, I think anyone who's traveled to this particular region, and it's in many ways quite similar to what you might find in a place like Ireland, or sort of kind of the Brittany in France. There's a kind of magic. There's this kind of like belief in fairies and just a connection to the land that is really sort of unique to these regions. And I think Newfoundland is no exception. That's where David Blackwood comes from. He's born and raised in Newfoundland. And one of his objectives in making artwork and these really beautiful sort of iconic prints has really been to tell the story of this place and to communicate, not only actual literal narratives, but also the feeling of being there. We have a great comment here. So imposing and fierce elements like the whale, the iceberg, the sea in contrast with puny people and their boats. Yeah, that's such a nice way of saying it. How poetic. Thanks. So we have, this idea of the kind of really stark contrast here. And as much as humans can attempt to sort of take over the land or use things as resources here and there, there's this idea that we're actually dwarfed in comparison to the power of the land. And I think seeing these huge icebergs in the background and seeing this huge whale in the foreground, and I really like how this person has said it, these kind of puny people in their little boats. They just seem so small and so fragile and in some ways kind of ridiculous up against these two other big forces. And I'm curious if anyone here has traveled to Newfoundland. And if you have, what are some things that, struck you about what's special about that place? And if you haven't, what kind of sort of mythology have you heard about Newfoundland, or words that you might associate with the place or the people? Yeah, so not lots of connections to Celtic culture. Yeah, there is something. As I was mentioning, that kind of the accent, the sort of connection to places like Ireland. Certainly, there's this kind of magic in nature that I think exists there, and maybe is linked to what the other participant was saying, sort of just how dominant the landscape is and how powerful that you can't help but create stories about it. And Lynn here is saying it was very long ago, but the aged houses against the rocks, very weathered people too, but ubiquitousness of fish, blueberries, water. Yeah, our next door neighbor actually is from Newfoundland, and he just got back from a little trip there, and he was telling me about the blueberries. I've never experienced it myself, but there's really like blueberry picking time, and just you can find them everywhere. He came back with these bins and bins and bins to freeze and was giving them away to us. So I love that idea of that ubiquitousness of like this kind of plenty, and it seems almost like a sort of paradise when you just have these tasty things for sustenance. And certainly fishing, right? Because Newfoundland, it's also known as the Rock, and so it's very difficult. There's not apple orchards and other sorts of things that we might grow very easily in places like Southern Ontario. But there's a very different relationship with the land, and known to be very harsh, very cold winters, things like that. And certainly fishing is a real source of livelihood and survival for many. And so David Blackwood, in his work, he wanted to incorporate a lot of these things. And this particular work we're looking at is based on a real story that did happen, and these people were saved. And as far as I know, whales never eat humans. I don't think there's been any accounts, but they certainly could do a lot of damage to a little boat, right? Like if this whale were to swim a little closer and, flap its fins or its tail, it could be deadly for people. So that's why this sort of ominous presence here. Oh yeah, and Nathan here is saying, reminds me of things like Moby Dick or other tales and legends. And I think that's one of the things that David Blackwood really wanted to create, is this mythology. Having grown up there decades ago, he sees that, in many cases, traditional ways of life have disappeared. There was a big sort of mass government relocation program at a certain point. So a lot of small towns that he had visited as a child they don't really exist as towns anymore, because folks were relocated to be closer to more resources. And so he wanted to really carry on these stories and these ideas related to his ancestors and lessons that he learned throughout his childhood too. And the icebergs, I don't know, those of you who said you've been there, when you were there, did you actually see some of the icebergs floating? Yeah, there's certain times of year, I know especially near Fogo Island, folks can go there and you just see these huge masses of icebergs just, yeah, floating there in the ocean. And quite magical and otherworldly. Are there any other thoughts or questions? Oh, we've got one right here. So there's so much focus on the whale and nature, and the man-made ship is what's burning. Yeah, maybe sending a message about the environment too. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think, this one was made in 1980, and so well before the climate crisis as we publicize it today and as we're all very concerned about it today. But I think certainly in terms of, relationship to the land and messages of how we as humans tend to think, the world is pretty anthropocentric and we've got this heightened level of importance. And that's just not the case, right? And I think even globally, when we think about forest fires that were happening in BC this summer and the recent weather events in New Orleans, like I think we're often reminded that nature is a force much stronger than us. Yeah, and Donna too seems to think the whale is laughing. Yeah, that was my first thought too. I definitely think, it's entertained in some way. Maybe for that very reason, thinking, these little people think they're saved now, and who knows. All right, so the next work that I want to share with you is this one by, again, an artist named Kenojuak Ashevak. And this one was made in 1960. So instead of an etching, like we were looking at with Blackwood, this particular one is a stone cut, which I can describe in a little bit more detail if folks are interested later on. But yeah, why don't we start again by just noticing sort of what you see going on here? What would you say this is a print of? Yeah, so some kind of, maybe people feeding animals. If we look carefully, you can see, the hands are sort of open like this. So yeah, maybe there's some food in there. Lynn here is saying, the interconnectedness of people and the animal world. I like that a lot too. Yeah, because they're actually sort of literally linked here, right? There's no separation between any of these creatures that I can see, and you don't really know where it starts and where it stops. A dance of the birds, animals and humans. Very nice. I find like this piece, if I just kind of look at it quickly, like open my eyes and then close them, there's a sort of essence of bird here. There's kind of something that seems like feathery or fluttering. And then, when you start to look more closely, you think, oh yeah, there's actually sort of very detailed different types of birds here and kind of personalities of each of the creatures being represented. Yeah, nice comment there, Nathan. So animals look mythological. Some have 6 tails and other things, and the tails and wings sort of bend together. Yeah, and it can be really hard to tell what's what, right? Like in this big center one, it looks like this kind of tail fanning out that then seems to become sort of the wing of another one. It looks like a small alien of sorts. Yeah, this is the one figure that seems a bit of a hybrid, right? This kind of, I don't know, to me, it looks kind of like an alien or maybe some sort of young girl. I'm just judging by the hair here, which, in my interpretation might seem like 2 braids or something. And then, and Donna's noticed that too. So in the one to the left of the human figure at the bottom that is sort of part human, part animal, she's doing this interesting kind of pounce, right? And it certainly seems to have kind of the animal paws in some way, but then a human head. Certainly, I don't know as much about how this might happen with birds, but certainly at the AGO we've had some really interesting sculptural work by Inuit artists that reference bears and how certain shamans and healers in different Inuit communities can kind of take on, they themselves sort of become part animal in order to connect with the spirit world and then bring back messages to the human world. And so I think it's not unusual to see, creatures represented that are part one animal and part human. Oh yeah, Nanny says it looks maybe like a child playing. I can see that too. Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, a child who's accompanying a grown-up out there in the wilderness somewhere and playing a neat game. Someone else is saying it's interesting how all the animals and humans are the same color, almost in shadow or hidden in a way. Mm-hmm. And it's a neat thing that we can figure out with printmaking, right? Because there tends to be this big contrast, and printmakers have to decide which part of the image. You could do this exact image in either way, right? Where it's these figures, the birds and the humans, that actually have the color to them and the ink spread on, or it could have been done in the reverse. And so, yeah, I really appreciate this comment, because at some point Ashevak made the deliberate choice to have the living things here in this kind of shadowy ink. I'm curious, folks who might know about her or have heard her name before, is there anything that you associate with Kenojuak Ashevak? I'll share some elements of her biography too, but I'm curious, yeah, if folks have encountered her work before. Oh yeah, Lisa's saying owls. Yeah, totally. She's best, I think for many of us, kind of best known for her owl prints. There was one here, I can get the date right. So yeah, in 1970, the Canadian government turned one of her images called Enchanted Owl, this sort of beautiful, very colorful owl with this tail sort of spawning out, into a postage stamp. She had created it in 1960, but then in 1970 it became a stamp. And I think for many people that was the first time they had encountered her work. And she did do many other owls over the years. And she had a really fascinating and very long life. She was born in 1927 and lived until 2013. So good long life. And was actually born in Baffin Island, on Baffin Island, into a family that was migratory. And so basically meaning her family would sort of relocate depending on the hunt, and didn't have sort of a fixed point or a fixed address for all of her childhood, really. She was set up, she had an arranged marriage when she was quite young, and at first she really didn't like this, but then eventually sort of realized that her husband was quite respectful of her work, and they kind of collaborated on quite a lot of art. She ended up having 14 children, gave birth 11 times, I believe, and 7 of them survived past infancy, and then she ended up adopting 7 other children. So you can imagine, just very different than many of us, kind of, again, living in Southern Ontario, might imagine a life already. That really tragic loss of sort of the high infant mortality rate back in that would have been sort of the 40s and 50s, and the trauma that would have been associated with that. And then, yeah, just the wherewithal to raise 14 tiny humans is really quite something. And she also, in addition to sort of this really intense home life, became, one of the most famous artists in the country, I'd say, and certainly Inuit artists. And she ended up being associated with the Cape Dorset sort of printmaking cooperative later in life, and ended up being sort of one of the leaders there. She was the first woman to be sort of given status in the center, and then her talent was really recognized, and ended up mentoring a lot of others. So, and she actually started making art because at one point in her young life, she was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and for 3 years was kind of kept in this special hospital. And there was a fellow there who was really quite interested in Inuit art, and so he encouraged her and a few others to start drawing. And that's where she recognized that, this is something she loved to do and had talent. And then he would go off and kind of sell these works in the big cities, and come back and say, there's a market for this. There's a real market for Inuit art. And so, she ended up making her life in that way, and certainly tremendous talent and tremendous influence. Oh, I like this comment here that someone is saying too about this work. There's a sense of noise and cacophony to this too. Totally, and for me that comes from these kind of birds and what you imagine, sort of the sound of the flutter, and and for me at once it's sort of cacophonous and dance-like, as many have said. But yeah, in other ways, and I don't know if it's the sort of way people have their hands or something, but there seems to be a bit of a sort of a calm and a presence to certainly the human characters as well. The red mark in the top left really draws my eye too. Yeah, I believe that that's her signature up there. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's probably her signature. Yeah, with a different alphabet. All right, so I think we're at time now to start into our own art making. And a couple of things to note about this. This is a bit of an involved process. I'm going to share my screen in a different way so folks can see my setup here. Here we go. So the things you will need for today's activity, and I hope most of you have, all if not many of these things or something else you could use to improvise with instead. So we need some paper, a pencil, I'd say at least 2 paper clips, because one of them we're going to have to sort of unravel a little bit and the other we'll have to keep intact. Some acrylic paint, ideally. If you have ink, that's great. If not, acrylic paint will do the trick too. So I've got a green and a blue one here. Potato. I've already cut mine up. So hopefully you have just a regular sort of old baking potato will do the trick. And I think that that's all. Maybe actually some scissors too would be helpful if your paper is large. So inspired by what we've seen here, I'm going to suggest that we do a rather simple type of drawing here. Bear in mind the size of your potato. You certainly don't want it to be bigger and kind of extending past the perimeter of your potato. So come up with, one thing that might be helpful is, even if you do, this is what I'm going to do. Do a little outline of the shape of my potato there. There we go. So now we know it's not going to be bigger than that. I should say too, the very first step would actually be to cut up your potato, which we probably don't need too much guidance to do, but I will say that it'll probably work best if you have the sort of width or the size of it being, 1 to 1.5 inches, I'd say. And then also, if you make an error in the first one, you'll have a few backup pieces that you can use too, or if you want to do several different types of images, you can do that too in different potatoes. So I've now traced the outline here. Now in this little oval shape, I'm going to come up with an image. So I'm not going to make it too complicated. Our carving tool, again, is going to be a paper clip. So you don't want to do anything with really fine detail unless you have a really teeny paper clip that, that you can use as a tool. But I would suggest keeping it rather basic. And, you can, again, start simple and then get more complicated if you want to. I'm going to start, I think, with a bit of a tree, and we'll see how that works. Extend up here. There's really no wrong way of doing this. Go. That side of here too. And I know it's a little bit tricky to share our work in this virtual format, but I really will encourage you in the ways that you can to share with us, because I really love to see what others create. And I get a lot from your images too. So maybe folks can just type into the chat what it is that you've decided to draw here. And I'll see my tree in progress here. What have some other folks decided to draw? given the themes of our two other works today have been inspired by nature, so I think, you could think about if you're searching for something, maybe a sun or some kind of simple flower. Another interesting thing with Kenojuak Ashevak is that she would often say that she wouldn't plan out her work in advance. She would just sort of wait and see what struck her in the moment. And so also, if that's how you want to work, that's fine. And you could even turn it into something a little bit more abstract. Perhaps I'll do another one down here just so I have options. And then you can play around in the carving too, whether you want this to be something quite literal and representing maybe something inspired by birds, maybe something that just looks kind of featherish to you. Who knows? Somewhat abstract. There we go. Might add a few more lines in here just for fun. Oh, and someone is saying that, they don't have all the materials, but they're, the idea of portraying nature on a potato feels right. I like that. And it's fun how the imperfections get copied each time you trace the outline because the potato is the same. It's true. Yeah, it's kind of both perfect and imperfect, huh? There we go. So let's say now I'm going to work first with my tree and see how we do. And you can follow along at home. So I'm going to cut out this little shape. I'm actually going to cut it a little bit wider than the potato itself, just so it's a little bit easier to hold. There we go. And now I'm going to place it on top of my potato here. And here's where I'd suggest you take one of your paper clips and sort of unravel it, because we need a spiky end right over here. And so I'm going to put this just like so. And ideally, what you'll be able to do is poke some holes through. It doesn't need to be side by side. You can leave a little bit of distance in between. You're going to poke right through the paper into your potato. So it gives you a sense of the line that you're eventually going to follow when you do your carving. Go. Tricky thing is that potatoes are rather wet to work with. So again, just like that one participant said, it's not, the imperfections also make it perfect. There we go. Now I'll do this one. It feels like I'm giving the potato a tattoo. I kind of feel that way too. Here we go. Now back to the trunk here. And again, don't worry if when you're doing this, if it seems like you've gone off course a little bit, you can always correct it later when you actually do the carving. And plus, when you're actually working with the carving tools, it's not going to look exactly how you planned anyways. There we go. So now I'll hold it up closer. Not sure if the camera will. There you go. You can see sort of the outline of my lines here. And now, of course, you have a choice to make. You can choose whether you're going to carve around outside of your shape, and then the only thing that is actually going to have the paint on it is the shape itself, in my case, a tree, or whether you want to carve the tree itself, and then the only thing that's going to have the ink or the paint on it is the outside area. So that's really, really up to you. I might try this one by carving the actual tree itself. And then if I have some time to do another one, I might do it the opposite way. So let's see, I'm going to find the smallest paper clip I have here. And then essentially you're going to use this as a carving tool. So you sort of dig right in and you pull the potato out. And you follow your lines as best you can. I don't generally wear glasses, but I feel like if I did, this would be a good moment to pull them out. And this is where you'll also learn, oops, I made that line a little bit smaller than my carving tool can handle, and that is a-okay. Yeah, it does feel a little bit like carving pumpkins, that's for sure. There we go. There's a smaller branch that's going to be a little challenging. We'll see how this turns out when we do it. And I'm curious to hear from those of you at home, how is this going for you? Any challenges you've encountered so far? Certainly David Blackwood has much better etching tools when he's kind of scraping his images into copper plates. And yeah, Kenojuak Ashevak, she does something really interesting, you can probably saw, called stone cut. And so hers wouldn't go through sort of a printing press like etchings would. She would essentially have a large stone in front of her and carve into it, so carve away from it, or carve parts of the rock away, and then spread ink on top of whatever is kind of left over and heightened, and then press a paper on top. And so very different way of working. And if you find carving into a potato here challenging, I would suggest imagining that you're doing this on a hard stone. Okay, so my tree does not look exactly like my drawing, but I think it'll be good enough. There we go. So the next step then is to dry off your potato, because before, probably when you were carving in there, very likely, some different moisture from the potato came up to the surface. So before you put your paint or your ink on there, you really want to dry it off. So in my case, I have this little towel. A paper towel will do just fine too. I'm going to press it dry. There we go. You want to get it as dry as you can, because otherwise when you put the paint on top, it won't stick quite as well and your print will not look as satisfying. And then, next up, grab a paintbrush. In this case, maybe I'll do a green background. And then you're going to paint the parts that are high enough. And slowly you'll see what your image is going to look like. Again, potatoes are a tricky material to work with because it's a little bit hard to see what's what. There we go. So my tree has turned into more of a dancing type tree. I'll say that that's because of Ashevak's image we just looked at, and this kind of dancing birds and humans. There we go. Then, very next step. Oh yeah, so you have a question here. So I'm using acrylic paint, right? I mentioned at the start, if folks had ink, if you are sort of a tried and true printmaker and you've got a whole studio set up, go be my guest and use ink. But we figured most people probably wouldn't have that, so this is just acrylic paint. And it's interesting, now that I look at my how my print here turned out, it looks a little bit like a dancing creature actually. So now, and you can, again, if you have kind of fancier like watercolor paper or something, you can use that and it'll hold the paint better. I'm just using sort of plain white paper, which is totally fine too. And so the tricky part is when you put it down, make sure you don't move it around. You're just going to sort of tap gently with your fingers. You want to avoid probably a full hand because you might end up twisting it. And then lift it straight up. There we go. Not so bad. I see some kind of like, yeah, dancing figure, almost like a lion shape actually. Maybe I'll do another one beside it. Do another one beside it here in blue and see how the colors mix and what it looks like. Nice thing too with printmaking is you can kind of use and reuse it. And so it might become a different thing if you turn it upside down. I'm going to try that this time. There we go. What if I do it? Let's see. Be like a reflection. And again, tap, tap, tap. Pull it a little bit. Oh yeah, I can kind of see a dragon in here too. Ta-da! So not too bad. I'm wondering if anybody at home has done some that they would like to share with us. If you are willing to share, I would suggest you, well, first turn on your video, and then secondly, hold it up to your camera for a couple of minutes, because maybe not a few minutes, but longer than just a short flash, because my colleague here who is doing tech support can highlight your video. In the past, when folks have shared, they sort of flash it up and I hardly see it, and then we'd really love to see what you've really created. And so, yeah, those who might be willing, turn on your camera, hold it up to the camera for a little while until you can see your image has been highlighted. Oh, do we have someone who wants to share here? Lovely. Oh, nice. Okay, just keep holding it up for a second, Lynn. Wow. I see some sort of, I go to say like caribou or deer or something with their head bent. Is that in line with what you had envisioned or different?
It was a raccoon, actually, but they have about the same shape. So.
Very nice. Good job, though. That's beautiful, and I love the way you repeated it on there too. Yeah, it's true. We have someone commenting saying it looks like a herd of animals there.
There we go.
And that he can see the raccoon. Very nice. Well, thanks so much, everybody. You all take good care, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.